Dans, I'm Mark Goldbridge, and I'm like a kid at Christmas, I'll tell you, because we've got so much to get into on the show this morning. We'll be talking the latest about Bruno Fernandez and a transfer out of Manchester United. Quite incredible that this is back being mentioned again, but we'll talk about where it's coming from and why it's coming out. Also, David Ornstein, one of the most prestigious journalists in the UK, mentioning Pochettino and the Manchester United job. Yes, he genuinely did. We'll talk about that. We'll take your thoughts on it as well. Casemiro, Saudi Arabian talks. We'll talk about that. Also, Sesko and his suitability to Manchester United. Is he the striker that Manchester United need to bring in? Which also feeds back into the Rasmus debate of yesterday. We've also got some injury updates on key players, including Marcus Rashford, who may well be back for the Brighton game. And we'll also be delving into the world of sports agencies and what players are represented by who, so that when we see certain journalists leaking information, we can sort of figure out potentially where they're getting it from and what players it benefits to slate other players, and why certain journalists would do that and quite happily be the mouthpiece for those players. We'll talk about that. I'm sure you're looking forward to it. Lots to get into on the show this morning, and I hope you're all doing well as well. Let's talk about this Bruno Fernandez story to start off with. It came from The Sun. It came from Neil Custis, and therefore I think we should all just walk away. But as I've said over years before, Neil Custis has been a journalist close to Manchester United for many, many years, and occasionally has come out with some good information. Not recently, if I'm being completely honest. Was he not the person who said that Qatar would be in charge of Man United by October? And he said it last August, something like that. There's been plenty of them. But the Bruno Fernandez story is, for me, as depressing as it is, confusing. So basically, Man United will listen to offers for Bruno Fernandez in the summer. Bruno Fernandez may well leave after the FA Cup final. If this is the plan of Ineos, then Ineos are just the Glazers in a wolf in sheep's clothing. They are just the Glazers. I mean, this is not... If you've got Sir David Brailsford running a strategic review for 5 months and he comes to the conclusion that we should sell Bruno Fernandez, then we've just wasted 5 months. I mean, look, Bruno Fernandez is not the best captain in the world. He's no Roy Keane. He's no John Terry. He's no Steven Gerrard. He's no Nemanja Vidic. But he is the best player we have in that dressing room in relation to accountability, sustainability, perseverance, understanding of what Manchester United is. I've posed the question recently, can Bruno Fernandes play in an Arsenal team? Can he play in a Liverpool team? Can he play in a Man City team? And honestly, you'd look at it and go, no. But what you'd also have to acknowledge is Bruno Fernandes plays in a team with people like Scott McTominay next to him, Christian Eriksen, fallen off Casemiro. Wout Weghorst has been ahead of him. Rashford and Antony on the wing. Like, he doesn't play with the likes of Foden, De Bruyne, Haaland, Saka, McAllister, Salah. He has, it's hard to judge Bruno when he hasn't got good players around him. And this is fundamentally one of the big things that Man United need to do. Bring in better players to get the best out of the likes of Garnacho, Mainu, Rasmus, but also the likes of Bruno. I think Bruno can't be judged until we've really got better players around him. What he can be judged on is his, quality in a bad Man United side at times. His determination to put on a Man United shirt and give his everything every single game. And why would you remove that? I mean, we can't sell 20 players this summer. I would sell 20 players before I even talked about selling Bruno Fernandez. So selling Bruno Fernandez to me would be terrifying. I mean, I want to be even-handed here. We do a poll on it, of course. But what I wanted to say about Bruno Fernandez was, if there was any truth in this, why would you do it if you're Ineos? And the only thing I could come up with really was the same reason we're going to let Varane go. Money. And we're not a football club that should be doing that. That's not a rebuild to let good players go because you save money. You've got to replace good players. I look at that United team and I look at it like the bottom of a rabbit hutch. The water probably needs replacing for the rabbit, but the water's okay for another day. What needs replacing is all the shit at the bottom. And replacing Bruno Fernandes would be like replacing the water without clearing out the shit. Like, Bruno Fernandes may well need to be replaced next summer. But this summer, You're telling me that Bruno needs to go before Maguire, Varane, Lindelof, Wan-Bissaka, Casemiro, Eriksen, Sancho, Greenwood, Martial, Van der Beek, Rashford. You know, countless players need to go before Bruno. And if you let Bruno go, do you keep Rashford? Do you keep Casemiro? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me to let Bruno go this summer. I'll have the conversation about it. I've said it myself. I think Bruno is a question mark about whether he'd play for a Liverpool team or an Arsenal team. Yeah, that question mark is valid, but we're not Liverpool or Man City. We're competing at the moment with the likes of Brighton, Newcastle and Chelsea. And Bruno Fernandez is more than good enough for that level of football at Manchester United, and he's proven that. He's also the only real leader that we have. I can't believe that United would want to cash in on Bruno. And I also can't believe for 1 minute that Bruno Fernandez at 29 or 30 would want to go and play in Saudi Arabia either. I mean, that doesn't fit in with the type of personality he is. So I'd like to file this under bullshit, and I would like it to be not true. And I don't think it is true. And as Fabrizio Romano has said today, I think he tweeted it out earlier, with regards to the Bruno Fernandez Saudi Arabian connections, as we've spoken about on this channel a couple of times before, there is no doubt that Bruno Fernandez has been subject to interest from Saudi Arabia, but Manchester United have always resisted that. And at this moment in time, Bruno Fernandez has never shown any interest in wanting to do it as well. But look, Saudi Arabia will be interested, absolutely got no doubt about that, but this is what Fabrizio had to say. Bruno has always been one of the players most appreciated by the Saudi Pro League since the project started. There are no concrete negotiations. Bruno is fully focused on Manchester United and will not discuss anything with the club before knowing the technical project and whether they will continue with Ten Hag or change the manager. So look, if Bruno Fernandez knocks on the door and says he wants to go, we've got a very different story, but I just don't see that. Eric says, me and my friend are betting if you're going to make a morning sneeze or not, or when. Make me some dough. I don't feel one coming on at the moment, Eric, but I'll do my best. Greenwood for Roque, any news? Says Wolfie. No. And John says, embarrassing if we choose to get rid of Bruno. Missed the last couple of games. The only reason he doesn't stop running everywhere is because he doesn't have help, says John. Man United looking to cash in on Bruno would be idiotic. Absolutely idiotic. Stupid. I would actually probably say, if I found out that Ineos wanted to sell Bruno Fernandez, I'd probably be Ineos out. I think it'd be fucking stupid. Absolutely stupid. Not because no player should be beyond being sold, but because he shouldn't be anywhere near the top of the list. It would terrify me if we were getting rid of Bruno, because it would be for money. And if you want to cash in on somebody, cash in on Rashford. Rashford's the most if you want to raise money, get rid of Rashford. It's so obvious. I'm not saying sell Rashford. I'm just saying, if you're thinking about selling Bruno to get some money, Bruno brings a lot to that team. Leadership, mentality, availability, consistency. All right, he's not been good this season, but across the last 3 or 4 years, Rashford, younger, more money, bigger wages, get rid of him. It wouldn't make sense to me to get rid of Bruno. But on the poll at the moment, 64% of you wouldn't sell him, 36% of you would. Let me know why you would. We'll read some of them out. Disappointing our better players are getting these crap stories to sticks. I mean, look, I've not been live with you, have I, since Sunday night. It was a couple of videos I did with Ben Foster in my evening show last night, but I was out last night, so that's why I wasn't live. Absolutely disgusting. You know I said it yesterday and I don't want to repeat it, but disgusting, some of the stories that are coming out. And yet again, it's against foreign players, isn't it? Bruno Fernandez is up for sale. Why are we talking about selling Bruno? Bruno Fernandez is up for sale. Why are we trying to unsettle Bruno Fernandez with our press in this country? Why are we trying to unsettle Bruno again? Rasmus yesterday. Why are we trying to unsettle a 21-year-old? 2 weeks ago, why are we trying to unsettle Garnacho, 19? Do you realise that footballers do become aware of this sort of stuff? And do you realise that these footballers can then have a negative feeling towards this country and the way they've been treated, which ultimately has a bad impact on their development and their future love for maybe Manchester United? It's disgusting. It's absolutely, it's always the same as well. Always the same. We're always going after these foreign players, and it happens all the time. And the interesting thing is, I'll bring this in now because I want to talk about Poch and Casemiro and stuff as well. There is this weird cult on X, or formerly known as Twitter, where there is this agency called SEG Agency, which is, I believe it's Ten Hag's age. I think Ten Hag's represented by it. Rasmus is represented by it. And there is an obsession in the British media and in a vocal minority of United fans that there is some sort of conspiracy going on with Seg and United. Right. What the only conspiracy is that Seg probably don't speak to the British journalists because they're not, that's not what they do. But there is also, if you want to walk into if you want to open the door into like conspiracy theories around sports PR agencies, right? Let me talk to you about the sports PR company, which is based in London. And a recent article back in November last year mentioned Marcus Rashford using them. They're a PR company. And they're a very, very powerful PR company, but you've probably never heard of them. They've represented people like, I think, Beckham in the past, Didier Drogba, a lot of Chelsea players. Currently, apparently, on their books, they've got Jadon Sancho, Marcus Rashford, Mason Mount. And they're called the Sports PR Company. Now, no one ever mentions them, but apparently they've got Mount, Rashford and Sancho. And Varane as well. So there is a sports PR company with 4 very well-paid Manchester United players on their books who are all underperforming in different ways. What's the job of a PR company? And you wonder sometimes about these weird articles that come out against certain players but seem to protect other players. Look, I'm not saying anything. All I'm saying is the world of football is not the world of football I grew up in. You've got players almost like it's becoming more and more like wrestling. You've got different factions, like different cliques being represented by different people. And they're paying that company and they're paying that company and then they're not passing to them apparently. And it's just, Man United is a mess, Alan, an absolute fucking mess. If I was in charge of that football club, I would say to every single player, I've had enough of these PR companies. I've had enough of you playing off against each other because you want a little bit of positivity, so you throw a teammate under the bus. Get the fuck out. Like, it's Manchester United should be the only sports PR company these people are playing for. The only brand I'm interested in is brand Manchester United, putting Manchester United first. Because I look at some of the shit that's come out in the last 48 hours again, against certain people, but protecting certain people. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out who might have spoken to who, about who, to protect who, and throw the shade on them. Like, we've had Rasmus and Bruno in 24 hours with negative shit thrown at them. And then we've had other players that maybe have had a bit of shit for a few weeks, not having anything at all. And you think, I wonder where that person might be getting this absolutely amazing shit story from and why. And, I go back to that piece in the MEN last night about a Man United squad member has said that certain players aren't passing to Rasmus because they don't think he's good enough. And I think squad member, so they're not currently playing for Man United really, but they're part of the squad. What squad member who's not currently playing for Man United, but might have mates or fellow agency members who are part of the first team not doing well, who you can throw Rasmus under the bus and it protects them, but they're a squad member and it protects them as well. I figured it out. Well, I figured out a potential one there. I'm not going to say the names, much the same as Wayne Rooney won't say the names of the players injured. It's not fair. But the fact that I can conspiracy theory figure out who might be feeding these stories to the press to protect those players and throw a fellow United player under the bus, yes, it could be a conspiracy theory. But is this not the mess of Manchester United where we've got players in different factions feeding stuff to some knobhead journalist to, cause shit for another United player? It's weird. And look, on the Rasmus thing, I was watching a show last night. I went to watch Jackmate in Birmingham, but I had a few people messaging me saying it's almost like Monday Night Football watched your video. Well, I don't think they watched my video at all, our video. I think they just know what we know. And I think what Gary Neville said is, in relation to Rasmus Hojlund and not scoring goals, he's not being fed the ball early enough. And we spoke about this on the show last night. I watched Rasmus at Atalanta. Like, I've been watching quite a bit of Sesko recently and a couple of other strikers because I don't know whether they're coming to United at the moment, but, I want to start to know about them for then when the transfer stories kick in. And I want to talk to you about Sesko in a few minutes. But I watched a lot of Rasmus in the last few months of last season when I sort of found out that we were quite keen on him. The amount of times Atalanta would feed him the ball early in the channel for him to run onto. When we were talking about Rasmus last year, one of the big things we said is that he's actually a really good dribbler of the ball. You know, it's good to get the ball into him early that he can run onto and dribble, and he can create. Well, we never get the ball in early. Well, Gary Neville was talking about this last night. We're not putting the ball in quick enough, and we never put the ball in quick enough. So all this nonsense about protecting certain players who are shit at crossing by saying we don't cross because we don't think the striker's good enough. Well, why weren't you crossing 3 years ago? Why weren't you crossing 2 years ago? Why weren't you crossing last season then? You can't cross. Can't cross, won't cross. That's the problem with United, the creativity. We play with 3 forwards, and we've been doing it for years. Martial, Greenwood, Rashford was 3 forwards. How many years ago was that? That was fucking COVID. COVID, we were playing with 3 centre forwards. We've been doing it for years. This is not a Ten Hag thing. This is a fucking ideology that United implemented probably under Jose. We had Sanchez, Rashford, was it Zlatan? I can't remember. We've been playing 3 forwards for years. Years and years and years. No, it's got nothing to do with Ten Hag. Our profile of wingers are forwards, which is all fine and well. But then when you don't have fullbacks who can overlap and put a cross in, you're never going to put any crosses in. I don't know. Anyway, I get the feeling Ineos are trying to work on a shoestring budget, says Josh. If a sizable offer comes in for Bruno, I reckon they'll think about selling. Well, Josh, what did I say to you? What was that story a few weeks ago that everybody's got a price? And that's the thing, isn't it? When you tell the world everyone's got a price and the Saudis knock on the door and go, there's £100 million for Bruno Fernandez. This is what I mean. I'm talking about Ineos. If Ineos are willing to sell Bruno Fernandez for £100 million, that means they're literally willing to just sell anyone to raise money. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I mean, yes, we need to raise money, but you can't just sell anyone. You've also got to look at that dressing room. I mean, I think letting Bruno go and keeping some of the people that have been here for years. I mean, look, we figured out something yesterday, didn't we? There was a story last week that this dressing room is as bad as it was under Jose and Ollie. There's only 3 players that can tell the press that, and one of them's foreign. So there's only 2 players that could be telling the press that, and they're both British. Do you want those players still in the dressing room next year, Ineos? Do you still want those players in the dressing room that were there under Mourinho, Ollie, Rangnick and Ten Hag? Do you still want those players there? Because it's not Bruno, and that's what I'm saying. You can't just cash in and remove important personalities from the dressing room. Hi, Mark. Thank you very much, Leighton. He says, realistically, cash in on Rashford, but at the moment, who wants him? And Martinez needs to be captain. Well, we know that. Glennie says, if Luckhurst is confident in his story, maybe he'll bring it up in the presser, see what Ten Hag has got to say about it. He's not got the guts. Rory says, let me get my tinfoil foil hat first, says Rory. Well, there's nothing... Well, come back at me, Rory. I've just told you, I don't deal in rumour. I honestly, look, don't know what's going on, but what I do know is that some of these players are represented by PR companies, and they're different PR companies, and it looks at the moment, again... like we had under Rangnick in the January, where you've got factions leaking against each other. I love Bruno. I wouldn't be going out of my way to sell him. However, if a 70 million offer was there, we would be silly not to review it, says Charlie. If it's 100 million, or how much it should be for yes, says Mika. Look, I don't think money is a price with Bruno, because it's not... If you're selling Bruno, Rashford, Maguire, McTominay, if you're selling 15 players, sell Bruno. But if you're selling 6 players and one of them's Bruno, but you're keeping the likes of the Rashfords and the Maguires and the McTominays and the Lindelofs and the Casemiros, that's wrong. He shouldn't go before any of them. That's what I'm saying. Bruno overplays in this team because we're rubbish. He has to cover for the twats around him, says Sean Turner. Look at him in Portugal's side around good attacks. He's more often or not their best player. No player bigger than the club, says Ahmed. Sell him. Disappointing our better players are getting these crap stories, says Sticks. And if Bruno wants to leave, what should they do, says Robert. Well, look, if Bruno wants to leave, it's a different story, isn't it? Also, we've had Kay says, sell Casemiro so we can fix that embarrassing leaking roof. Can't believe the world had to witness that, says Cal. Why are we letting the PR merchant off the hook by not naming him? It's not abuse. He's ruining the dressing room, intentionally causing division, says Julian. Thoughts on Pep's statement, says Addy. I don't think I'm going to have time to get into the Pep stuff, Addy, but if I do at the end, we will. If not, I'll talk about it on the watch along tonight because I'm doing Man City Spurs on That's Football. And Rory C says, the issue with Rasmus is that the run he tries to make on the left gets occupied by the left winger cutting into the space to try and shoot. well, you might have identified one example, but as I said yesterday, there was 5 times where we had the ball on the halfway line yesterday, on Sunday, where he made the diagonal run into the channel, and Evans, Delo, McTominay, Garnacho, and I think it was McTominay twice could have played him in and ignored the pass. So it was on at times. On the leaking roof, I wasn't going to talk about the leaking roof. I'm probably in the minority here. You know, the leaking roof, don't give a shit. I don't even understand why TalkSport, Sky, TNT, and some of our fans are moaning about the leaking roof. I think there's such a hypocrisy to moan about the leaking roof. And this is my theory on the leaking roof, right? Why are we surprised? Oh my God, the roof's leaking again. But the Glazers have caused this. We don't talk about the Glazers anymore. They've been forgotten. They still own half the club, but no one talks about them. There's no protest. There's no Glazer out. We've got our Ineos 25%, and this is the positive thing that's good for the football club. I'm not interested in people moaning about the leaking roof because everyone's telling us to get behind Ineos. So Ineos are now what we're getting behind. Let's not talk about the leaking roof. We know about, Ineos didn't cause the leaking roof. The Glazers caused the leaking roof with 20 years of letting the stadium rot. They're still here. People want to get behind Ineos. We're getting behind Ineos. Shut up about the leaking roof. It was leaking 2 years ago. It was leaking last year. I don't get the obsession about the leaking roof. We're not owned by the Glazers anymore, apparently. We're owned by Ineos. It's not Ineos' fault. They've not let the club rot for 20 years. And we're not allowed to talk about the Glazers out anymore. The Glazers out protests have stopped. So what's the point in moaning about the leaking roof? So Jim's trying to build a new stadium. Why are we moaning about the leaking roof? Why are you shocked about the leaking roof? If you want to moan about the leaking roof, get your banners out again. Get the Glazers out trending on Twitter. We'll moan about the leaking roof, but we're not doing that anymore. We're not allowed to do that anymore. No one wants to do that anymore. The Glazer out movement's over. So why are we moaning about a leaking roof? I just don't get the point of moaning about the leaking roof. I don't get what the angle is. And you know me, I like an angle, but I don't get the leaking roof angle. It's leaked before. It will leak again. The stadium's rotting because of the Glazers, but we don't do Glazer out anymore because we've got Ineos. And it's not Ineos' fault that the roof is leaking. So I don't really get the point about the leaking roof. People doing tweets and articles and videos about the leaking roof. We don't do Glazers out anymore. So what's the point? Let's talk about David Ornstein and Pochettino. This took my breath away last night, actually. And it's great for the news show, for a news morning. So basically, David Ornstein was talking about Pochettino, and he was saying that if Pochettino was to leave Chelsea, there has been talks in the past between Ineos and Pochettino in relation to Ineos. So it wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility that, and what he said is, I'm not saying that that Man United are trying to get Pochettino and Chelsea will leave, get rid of Pochettino, but if Chelsea did part ways with Pochettino and Man United did part ways with Ten Hag, it's one to watch. And that's from David Ornstein. And look, admittedly, he says there's a couple of ifs there, but there is a link, and it would be one to watch if certain things happened. I mean, for God's sake, if we end up with Pochettino at Man United, I think I will just cry. I mean, I'll take Pochettino over Southgate, of course. I'd take him over Potter. But bloody Pochettino at Man United, no, absolutely not. For this, rinse and repeat from 2 years ago. Do not want Pochettino anywhere near Man United. Don't actually think he's a top-level coach. I think he's a decent coach. I think at Chelsea, he'll be the guy before the guy. He ain't going to win him the league there. Never. He's not that cut. He's fourth place and a cup run. That's what he is. And whilst that is nice, that's not what Man United need. We don't need that. So I hope there's nothing in it. But look, I bring it in because who knows what could happen in the world of football over the next 3 or 4 weeks. If Chelsea did get rid of Pochettino and Man United did get rid of Ten Hag, then, who knows, that could be back on the agenda again. We've known about the roof so long. Glazers pocketed over $1 billion and the roof still leaks as chunky. New stadium renovations will stop the leaf from leaking. Yeah, definitely. Selling Bruno is the polar opposite of what the Glazers would do. When have we ever sold a good player? Doesn't mean I agree with the decision, says Frank, says M. Dav. And also, I'll talk about that one in a moment, but there's a few other bits I want to get into. I just want to talk about Sesko for a moment, actually. There's a few bits I still need to go through this morning, but I want to talk about Sesko for a minute because I've been watching a lot of Sesko recently because United, I don't know who the striker's going to be, and we're going to sign a striker. So when United leak out or it gets leaked out who we're talking to, I want to be prepared to go, oh, this striker's like this striker's like that. So I've been watching Sesko a lot, and obviously at the weekend, Sesko's agent was at the Arsenal game. Now, that doesn't mean a thing. You know, he might have been there because Man United are in talks. He might have been there because, you know, he just wanted to watch a game. Who knows? There are other clubs looking at Sesko. And out of all the players that we've been linked to, I quite liked it when we were linked to him a couple of years ago as well. I think he's an interesting profile of player. Some of you might not have seen what he's all about. He's tall. He's a handful. He's technically quite good for a tall player. And he's not slow. So he certainly offers something as a striker that we don't really have in relation to aerial threat as well. Real aerial threat. But I was thinking about it, and I was watching Sesko, and I was like, look, obviously he's playing for a Leipzig team, which has a system, and they're a relatively decent side. But, and this is not exclusive to Sesko, fundamentally, every striker I look at, and I said the same with Rasmus, and I said it with Ronaldo, and I said it with Cavani, we could have Erling Haaland up front, and we wouldn't get the best out of him. We could have Harry Kane up front, and we wouldn't get the best out of him. In some ways, it matters not who the striker is if we don't solve out the service issue. And you can choose to blame it on the strikers and you know, make that myth up in your mind if you want to because you don't like a certain striker, that's fine. But this has been a graveyard shift for many years. And if we bring Sesko into this team, what he offers, we don't service. So we have to bring a striker in. But what we also have to do as fans is, you can't look at Sesko and go, well, there's a 30-goal-a-season striker, which he isn't anyway. But even if you did bring a 30-goal-a-season striker in, you're not going to get that at Man United. Even if you brought Osman in, he's not going to score 30 goals. Like, we don't service a striker to score 30 Premier League goals. We don't. We just don't. It's impossible. Ronaldo had an amazing season 2 years ago. I think he got 18 Premier League goals in the shittest Premier League side we've ever seen. And that was miraculous. And Ronaldo is one of the greatest players that's ever played. The service to Ronaldo that year was fucking awful. And it has been awful for years. So my big thing is, we can buy a striker, but I would be looking to buy a striker that ticks all the boxes for the cheapest price possible. Because there is it's just dead money spending as much as you can on a striker because it doesn't matter who it is. As I said, it could be Erling Haaland himself. And we've seen Erling Haaland get shut down by Real Madrid and Arsenal because he can't get any service. So it doesn't matter how good this striker is that we bring in, they won't get service. So we have to solve this. It's like having a router with the fastest internet in the world, but there's no wires from the road to your house. The router won't work. It won't provide you with your porn or your Netflix because there's no wire supplying it. And we can't just go and spend loads of money on the router. We've got to put the supply line in. And that's why I almost despair when people say we don't need another winger in Michael Olise, because we do need another winger. We actually probably need two. Because if we did buy Olise or a winger that can provide and he gets injured for 6 months, we're back where we were. We have to solve the supply line. Luke Shaw's a very good early crosser of the ball from the left, but he's never fit. So, you know, Frimpong, people are going, we don't need Frimpong. We fucking do need Frimpong. The assists he provides from the right-hand side are ridiculous. We need two fullbacks who can put crosses in the box, and we need a winger who can do it as well. Because that would be 3 supply lines that we haven't had all season. So, look, Sesko's a really interesting profile of striker. There is no doubt about it. And I'd be very happy if we brought him in. But if we don't solve the supply line, it will be a waste of time. And as I say, this predates Rasmus. This predates Ten Hag. This has been going on for 5 or 6 years. The graveyard shift. And I wouldn't say it's priority number one, because somebody said this to me the other day. If you could take, here's a puzzle for you. Goldbridge's morning puzzle. I'm not going to sneeze, mate. It's not going to happen. I'm sorry. It's not going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. But Riddle me this. If you could take one player from Manchester City to solve Man United's problems, who would it be? It's a trick question because whoever you pick won't solve our problems. And that's the thing. When you're swimming in shit, there's not one bar of soap that's going to clean you. It's going to take a jet wash, absolutely industrial level detergent. It's going to take a lot. And a lot of people are saying Rodri, and I would say Rodri, but he wouldn't change Man United. Not on his own. Rodri's fantastic. Best holding midfielder in the game. And I've played the game. And he is. But he wouldn't put Rodri in Man United's team next season. Where are we finishing? Look, with the injuries we've got at the moment, we'll be in the same place. So if you put Rodri into a team with our best 11, so you've got Martinez behind him, you've got Bruno in front of him, you've got functioning fullbacks, yeah, I'd put us in 4th place. Maybe 3rd. Probably not, to be honest. But we don't want to be 4th. We want to be 2nd. We want to be 1st. To be competitive, we would need to take Rodri, De Bruyne, Bernardo Silva, Hojlund, 2 of their centre-backs. We'd have to take a lot of their players. My point is, when I look at this Manchester United side, it's not 2 or 3 fixers. It's 8 or 9. Like, it is. We need a right back. We need a left back. We need 2 centre-backs. We need 2 midfielders. We need a striker. We need a winger. And that's just for the first team squad. Immediate first team. I'd still like to bulk the squad out a little bit as well. I mean, look, I agree with a lot of people. If Amrabat could replicate what he did on Sunday consistently, I'd keep him. I'd keep Amrabat as a squad player. He's never going to start, but I would keep Amrabat as a squad player because if we can do a cheap deal as a squad player, he'd be very good. I just don't know whether he can do it week in, week out. But that United team is not one player away from being successful. It's 7 or 8. It really is. Rodri's not on Player of the Year is scandalous, says Korean. Yeah, but we're very... I've been saying this for years. Some of you agree with me, some of you don't. I see it week in, week out, day in, day out. We are ridiculously British focused in this country, and we always have been. We're obsessed with Britishness. We're obsessed with British players. We look down at foreign players. We treat foreign players badly in the press. We see it all the time. This year, the Player of the Year is all about being British. Foden, Rice, or Palmer. And Rodri should be in there. Of course he should. But and look, Rice, Foden and Palmer have been brilliant, but it's all about that this year. Which is good for the English game to have 3 English players going for Player of the Year in the Premier League, which has been dominated by top foreign talent for decades. But yeah, I mean, take Rodri out of that Man City team, they don't win the league. Take Foden out of that team, I still think they would. I also think if you take Rice out of Arsenal, they don't win the league. I can confirm dressing room leaks stopped as soon as Mount left. Wow. Sean Dyche, you've dropped a very controversial statement here. Well, when you read and you didn't... Okay, so let me read this again. I can confirm the dressing... This is from Sean Dyche with a Chelsea badge in the Super Chats. I can confirm dressing room leaks stopped as soon as Mount left. If you're into information, you're talking about Poch like Erik ten Hag isn't a top 4 and cup manager. Both are on the same level. Sean, I don't know whether you're on about Mount and whether that's true because I'm not a Chelsea fan. But your Poch and Ten Hag comparison, yeah, all right, I can deal with that. I'm not getting into an argument. I'm not saying Ten Hag's better than Poch. But you're right. Why would I replace Ten Hag, who's a top 4 manager and a trophy winner, with Poch, who I think is a limited top 4 coach and a trophy winner? That's my whole point. Going from Ten Hag to Poch, no. Ralph Rangnick was right all along, says PM. Is Benny McCarthy the striking coach? The problem, says Keel. No, Keel. I think the problem at Manchester United is selfishness. Selfish behaviour is sinking this football club, and it has been for years. You've got people leaking against each other. You've got people not passing to each other. You've got people shooting from all over the place and being selfish. You've got people who've got injuries that they could be playing, but they're keeping themselves back so that they can come back when they want to come back. We're just a very, very selfish football club. Look, the podcast is well worth a listen to today. It's brand new out, Goldbridge Saves Football podcast. If you're out and about, driving, walking, working, and you want to listen to something in your ears, then definitely give it a listen, because we're going into a lot of stuff about the injuries and the title and Ten Hag. Some really good stuff in there. But I'll give you this little spoiler, but I'll go into it a lot more detail. The reason Man City and Arsenal and Liverpool don't have the problems that Man United have in relation to players. And I know Ben Foster said yesterday on the show, well, Ten Hag could just sort this out and get them to pass and stop them to moan. But this has been a problem at Man United for years and years. And it's happened to Ranić and it's happened to Mourinho. So it will happen to Ten Hag. There is a cultural toxicity at Manchester United that has been in evidence for a very, very long time. And the reason that it doesn't happen at clubs like Manchester City and like Arsenal is very, very simple. Because if somebody like Akanji pulls his calf and is out for a little bit of time and then thinks, I might have another week off, they're desperate to get back playing for Manchester for Manchester City, because if they don't, then there will be a Aki or a Diaz or a Stones that has taken their place and they can't get back into the team. So it's really, really about professionalism, competition for places and success. But also above Pep and Arteta, you've got a structure that backs them to the hilt. There's no uncertainty at Arsenal and Man City when a player decides, I might have a couple of weeks off with an injury. You'll be out of the team then, and you won't get back in the team. There's no uncertainty in Man City and Arsenal if a player feels like, leaking against another player. You'll be out of the team and you'll be sold. Look at what happened with Cancelo. And that is why, whatever happens with the manager, it won't make any difference at this football club in relation to player power if they don't implement technical directors, sporting directors, directors of football, CEOs that come down hard on these players and create a culture of togetherness. Tony Dev, welcome to Members Club. Thank you very much for that. Rory says, I think I heard that Frimpong's release clause only applies to teams in the Champions League. I may be thinking of someone else, but certainly someone's linked to us. Well, I didn't know that, Rory. If that's true, then we won't be getting Frimpong. Luke says, I don't always agree with you, Mark, but you're bang on here, 100%. Bruno fights for the badge. The hate towards Rasmus is disgusting, and Rashford is a joke, says Luke. I mean, I don't know why Rashford's been brought into this, to be honest with you. I mean, nobody's mentioned Marcus Rashford other than the sports PR stuff that, he is a member of a certain one. Other players are members of other ones. That's, if people want to make 5 from 2 plus 2, that's up to them. But let me just give you a bit of a Rashford story that is genuine. Funnily enough, I mean, it's not going to help, but it's coming from Samuel Luckhurst. So Samuel Luckhurst has given us an update on Rashford. Yesterday he was slagging off Hojlund and saying that people don't want to pass to him. And now he's given an update on Rashford's injury. So Rashford has been nursing 2 injuries during his recent layoff, bruised ribs and a bruised heel. Rashford is confident the bruising on his ribs has healed, but is still suffering from soreness on his heel, and his preference would be to return against Brighton on Sunday. Well, it's quite a thorough update, I'll say that. And I don't think there's any doubt that if you want to play in the FA Cup final, you've got to play against Brighton. So I think Martinez, Luke Shaw, Varane, Lindelof, Bruno, anyone else is injured, they're going to have to play tomorrow night or Brighton or if they want to play in the FA Cup final, because you can't throw... If you haven't played any minutes before Brighton, you can't play in the FA Cup. You can't start in the FA Cup final. You can't go into the FA Cup final saying you're fit when you've not played any minutes. So, look, I think it's logical that beyond Rashford, everybody's got to play in that Brighton game if they want to play in the FA Cup final. I think they all will. What I would say on that is it's a bit unfair that the only update is on Rashford, and I don't know why Manchester Evening News have only got an update on Rashford and nobody else, because I would say confidently that Martinez wants to play against Newcastle and Brighton so he can play in the FA Cup final. It'll be whether they risk him in the Newcastle game and then start him in the Brighton game. So Martinez is in the same position as Rashford, I would say. But the interesting thing about that story is, and I've got to be honest, when I listened to the Rooney stuff and what he said about Rashford a few weeks ago, I think a lot of people felt that Rooney was talking about Rashford because he mentioned Euros as well. But Rooney didn't say Rashford. And, you know, it's a dangerous game to start saying that Rooney was talking about Rashford because he could have been talking about Maguire. He could have been talking about, I mean, I think Rooney is part of the same agency as Maguire, so it probably wouldn't be Maguire because I presume they get on, but it could have been. He's going to play in the Euros. It could have been Bruno. It could have been the fact that he referenced the Euros. I think a lot of people thought it was Rashford, and I think that's a bit unfair. But this story that's come out from the Manchester Evening News about Rashford, and you know he's had a layoff because of bruising to his heel and his ribs. He wants to play against Brighton, but apparently, no, his preference is to wait until Brighton. If the FA Cup final was tomorrow, his preference would be to play tomorrow. And I think that's sort of what people are talking about. And it's a shame it's only Rashford that's being mentioned because, as I said, there will be other players in a very similar situation. Like, what's Luke Shaw? Luke Shaw might be, I'll be ready for Brighton. I don't want to push it against Newcastle. Maybe Bruno's going to say the same. He's going to the Euros. So it's unfair just to level it at Rashford. But the story in itself sort of leads to that. His preference is to play against Brighton because he's got a bit of soreness in his heel. But if the FA Cup final was tomorrow, his preference would be to play tomorrow. So that's sort of what many people are talking about here. There are players that are picking their return dates based on what's best for them. And that didn't used to happen. And what is best for them? To play in the FA Cup final, to be available for the Euros. That might actually be best for us. Does the Newcastle game actually matter? The FA Cup matters. What if Rashford or somebody, Martinez, plays tomorrow, takes a knock, and then he's out for the FA Cup final? So it's that balancing act, isn't it? But there's no doubt if the FA Cup final was tomorrow, some of these players would play. They'd push themselves to play. And to me, it's not about naming players. It's just about mentality. It's about the mentality. Like, we will never succeed with players that can pick and choose when they want to come back, because we need players that want to, you know, get on the pitch and play football for Man United. And I think this culture around United, whoever those players are, the culture is a weak culture. It's a selfish culture. I go back to it. We've got a very selfish culture at Manchester United. It's not about the greater good. It's not about passing. It's not about togetherness. It's about individual. We've seen people celebrating goals when they've had shit seasons and trying to say, I told you so. And we've seen that for years. Years. I've seen Pogba do it. You know, and I like Pogba, but we've created this selfish culture where it's about, I remember saying this a couple of years ago, brandification at Man United. And Man United encourage this. You know, we can all go on players. Man United encourage this. Not anymore. Ineos won't do it. But under a Glazer regime, we encouraged. We've just been beat at the weekend, but we were the winning team in training. You know, we don't do that anymore. I wonder why they don't do winning team in training pictures anymore, because people took the piss out of it. You've just been smashed at the weekend by fucking Watford and you're doing winning team pictures. Manchester United recruited somebody, I don't know whether they're still there, that was a specialist in social media and looked at trends on social media and things they could do to make unpopular players feel more popular. So we've played the game. We no doubt bought players in that were going to help our... Well, we've seen it in the quarterly results to shareholders. We've seen a massive uptake on Twitter interaction talking about transfer possibilities. Like, the club has fed this in its brandification of player and Manchester United itself. And the downside of that is you play the game, you ask the players to play the game, and then they become selfish islands and we don't perform on the pitch. We went too far on turning players into brands. And then when you're a brand, you become very, very sensitive to what other brands are doing, other players. And it's created this selfishness within our own dressing room. Selfishness, factions, PR, whatever you want to call it. And Man United have been a big part of that. This Ineos, or what would have been Qatari if they'd got it, change is well overdue. I just hope they can follow through on it, because we have a really selfish element in that football club who are focused on themselves. What can I get out of this game? What can I get out of this club? And I think that goes down to the very simple level of not passing. I mean, look, I like Delo. I don't think Dalot is a brand. I don't think Dalot has anything other than the interest of Man United at heart. But when he's at left back, running 40 yards to get a shot off, ignoring Garnacho, Rasmus, McTominay, and just running and shooting, it's infected everybody. Everybody just wants to shoot from 30, 40 yards. They're never looking at the pass. And it's just this mindset that's taken over everybody of, I must be that person. And it's got to change. Pep Guardiola would be subbing them for that, by the way. I don't. Thanks very much for that. It's on Ten Hag to set a good example and not pick them, says United One. And then pick who? Who's he going to pick, mate? Have you seen the team at the moment in the bench? You're right. It's very easy for Pep Guardiola to not pick Cancelo because he's got 3 or 4 other players that can play that position who are top class. But for someone like Ten Hag, it's what are you going to do? Who are you going to pick? Picking and choosing which games is entitlement, says Charlie. Exactly. Anyway, Casemiro, story coming out. Lots of people talking about this as well. In relation to Casemiro, apparently Saudi Arabian talks are being spoken about, and they value him at around £25 million. Well, look, with Casemiro, there's absolutely, I'm going to do a poll on this, there's absolutely no, 62% of you would not sell Bruno, by the way. 38% of you would. I still think that's very, very high. But then again, to be fair, I do respect that because I've just realised Bruno's always been a bit of a divisive player. For whatever reason he has. So, sell Casemiro, keep Casemiro. Honestly, you asked me this 4 months ago, I'd say, you're having a fucking laugh. Don't get rid of him. Massive mentality. Been there, done it. When these young players are in the dressing room and they look around and they see people like Casemiro and Varane, it's massive for them. But performance has to be a factor. It's sad that Varane and Casemiro are going to leave that dressing room. Just like it was sad when Ronaldo left, because I just think if you've got a Ferrari in your garage and you've got a load of Vauxhall Astras, it's the Ferrari you're looking at. And, you know, a garage can be a dressing room. You think about a dressing room being a garage full of cars, and you walk in that dressing room and there's a load of Vauxhall Astras, but then there's a couple of Ferraris in there. What are you looking at? You're looking at the Ferrari. And I do think Casemiro and Varane, whatever we think about them at the moment, reputationally, they are Ferraris, just the same as Ronaldo. And you take them out, you're just left with a load of Vauxhall Astras, aren't you? So I do feel sad that Casemiro and Varane are going to go. I think Ronaldo going was devastating just because of his standards. Like, his standards were just ridiculous, but people didn't want to listen. So people would say, well, if you haven't got the keys to the Ferrari, Mark, what's the point? And you're right. There's no point having those Ferraris in the dressing room if people aren't going to look at them. And clearly we've got a problem with that. But I think with Casemiro, if you can get £25 million, you've got to take it. You've got to take it. I mean, his performances in recent weeks. I mean, I actually had somebody say to me the other day, what's your agenda with Casemiro? And I was like, you genuinely don't watch the channel, do you? Like, Casemiro, I don't do agenda. Like, I really like Rashford, really like Martial, really like Casemiro, really like Bruno, and I've really gone in on them over the last couple of years because sometimes, you know, in my life, there's never more impactful words than criticism from people you respect. If I don't respect somebody and they're slagging me off, I'm just like, oh, haters gonna hate. I ain't interested in that. But if somebody I respect says to me, you're out of order there, I might have shut up. But in my private moments, I'll be like, fucking hell, if they're saying that, that really bothers me. So I've always had that mentality that, you know, if it's a player I like, I'm not going to protect them because I expect a certain standard. And when I go in on a player I like, I'm doing it because they're not hitting the standard I know they can hit. So I don't have an agenda against Casemiro. Over the last few weeks, I've been disgusted by some of the stuff he's done. That penalty against Coventry, there's just so many examples, and we saw it again against Arsenal. And it's become so consistent with Casemiro that I don't see a corner being turned. He doesn't look like a player that can deal with the pace of the Premier League. Now, whether he wants to go to the Saudi Arabian League, I personally think he could still play in Italy. but no one's going to afford him there. So from Manchester United's point of view, you've got a player on £300,000 a week, and they want to give us 25 million. It's just an absolute open goal, as 86% of you are voting for. £300,000 a week is a lot of money for Man United to save, as horrific as that is. And I hate it. I bloody hate it that as football fans, we have to talk like bankers. Like, we have to talk like bankers and go, oh, it'd be great to save 300 grand a week for the Glazers. I mean, every pound we save feeds into the dividend fund, which I'm sure they're going to start taking again. We act like it's our club. Like, if we save 300 grand a week, we're going to use that for players. We're hundreds of millions of pounds in debt, and we're still owned by the Glazers. And we still champion. Oh, and I know we won't get a transfer fee for Varane, who's our best centre-back, but we will save 300 grand a week. Where's that going to go? Debt repayments? So I'm never a big fan of championing saving wages. But why I mention his wages is he's unsellable. No one in Europe is going to take Casemiro and give us money and give him 300 grand a week. So it's not about saving his wages for me. It's about getting a transfer fee for a player we can't sell. So if we get 25 million, it's a bit like the lottery. You remove a player that's unsellable, and you get 25 million pounds for it. So for me, you've got to do it. You've got to do it. Casemiro on his worst day is still 10 times the player McTominay will ever be. We'll probably get the same transfer fee for both of them, says Julian. And look, we go around the same circle again, don't we? I mean, I had people at the weekend saying to me, why do you want to get rid of McTominay when he gets himself fit and plays? And I'm like, yeah, but did you watch the game? Like, he's just not that good. Nobody has ever questioned Scott McTominay's commitment to the cause, and he is not one of those players that's got a bruised, knee and says, I'll be back for Brighton. He'll play against Newcastle and he'll play for 90 minutes. Like, that's what Scott McTominay's... we're not criticising those players per se. If they don't want to play against Brighton because they think that they're not fully fit, that's up to them. But Scott McTominay and Johnny Evans will play. And they'll play half injured. It's a great mentality for a fan. It is. But you've also got to look at performance. If Pep Guardiola had, crap players who were, available, he wouldn't win the league. It would help him in an injury crisis, but he wouldn't win the league. Like, we need better players. Matt says, genuine question. You keep talking about how Hojlund gets no service and how it's been a graveyard shift for years. Why keep Bruno then? Says Matt. Because, two reasons really, Matt. One, I think it's a good question, by the way. One, I think Bruno, with better players around him, will be a better player. In relation to the passes he plays. I think he tries the Hollywood pass because he feels desperate a lot of the time. And also, two, I don't think Bruno Fernandez is the number 10 is the definitive supply line for Hojlund. I feel that as a striker, you get a lot more service from either flanks, and we don't provide any there. So I don't think Bruno Fernandez is solely responsible for supplying Rasmus Hojlund. I think that the biggest issue we have is down the flanks. And I think this would be the same if it was Sesko or any other striker. If we sell all the Deadwood players and then looked at Bruno just to make a huge bag to score a star signing, then maybe. Otherwise, no way, says Space. Thank you very much. Some great questions coming in there. I just feel like I've missed something. No creativity, fullbacks, we've done that. Sesko, Bruno, Rasmus. If I've forgotten something, let me know. Please smash a like on the video, by the way. We're nearly at 1,000 likes. Oh, yes. One of you did a super chat at the start asking me about Pep Guardiola. So basically, I don't know the exact quote, but Pep Guardiola was asked about whether the Premier League is boring because Man City are dominating it. And he pulled out some response that it's not boring because if it was about money, the net spend of Manchester United, Arsenal and Chelsea in the last few years has been more than Manchester City. Yeah, he genuinely said that. It's a shame that most journalists are cowards when it comes to these sort of things because the instant response should have been, do you realise why you are sat where you are, Pep? What do you mean? Because Man City flooded the club with ridiculous amounts of money from 2008. How do you think you went from Sean Gota to Erling Haaland? How do you think you ended up at Manchester City, mate? It's all right. You're probably right about net spend in the last few years, but what about the previous 15? Like, you obliterated everybody else with an influx of cash that you're actually facing 115 charges because of. So, yeah, the fact that he was allowed to say that, and some people are holding it up as a great point, is incredible. Pep Guardiola will be right. The net spend of Man United, Chelsea and Arsenal will be bigger than Man City in the last few years. But how did Man City get to the point where their net spend is good, where their revenue is 700 million, where their wage bill is good? Look, Man City are FFP legitimate. They have massive revenue and they're FFP compliant. And they always will be now. That's not the point. It's how they got to that point in their first 15 years. And it's interesting how Pep wants to talk about the last 5 because everyone else is talking about the previous 15. And that is why Man City where they are. Look, I'm old enough to know what Man City were pre-2008. And they weren't Chelsea, they weren't Arsenal, they weren't Man United, and they weren't Liverpool. They were competing against the likes of Southampton. They were getting beaten 8-2 by Middlesbrough. So when Pep talks about the league's not boring and it's not about money, he might want to understand the recent history of his own fucking football club. Incredible. As no one says, Pep drawing lines where it suits him. Well, look, the definition of somebody who is losing an argument is somebody who has selective memory, and Pep's done that. You know, he's absolutely wrong, but somebody should have challenged him on that. He thinks he's smart, and he's actually made himself look a right prat, to be honest. They inflated the entire transfer market as well, says Roy. Look, I'm not saying Man City aren't going to get found guilty, and I'm not saying that Chelsea didn't do the same, and I'm not saying that we haven't spent money in the past. But for Pep Guardiola to be asked whether the league is boring because Man City are so rich, then it is. They've won 6 of the last 7. They dominate everybody else. They are financially fair play compliant because of what they did in the first 15 years, where they absolutely obliterated everybody through money. Pep Guardiola would not be Man City manager if they didn't have money. So, yeah. 25 million for Casemiro gives us nothing towards FFP, says Spencer. Is that because of amortisation? We only bought him 2 years ago. You make a good point, and we spent 60 million on him. You make a very, very good point, Spencer. I don't know whether it's not pure profit, is it? Yeah, I mean, I'd have to bow down to the FFP specialist there. 2 years ago, we spent £60 million on Casemiro. 2 years later, we sell him for 25 million. Amortisation, we'd probably get nothing for FFP. Could use it on the roof, says yeah. Yeah, the money comes into the club, but it doesn't help your financial fair play. But that's what I mean about the desperation of money for Man United. Like, they'll look at that Casemiro deal and go, even though we can't put it into the transfers, we can still save his wages and put the money into something else. So it's a good point. Getting very technical though, Spencer, but it's a great point. Anyway, look, thanks everyone for watching this morning. We've got an Erik ten Hag press conference coming up for you about 1 o'clock. We'll be reacting to that. I'm live at 7 o'clock tonight because it's a big game on That's Football. It's Spurs against Man City. I think as Man United fans, we're all Spurs fans, 100%, I'm sure. But I will see you at 7 o'clock before that. And we've got the press conference as well. Great show this morning. Lots to talk about. Really enjoyed that. Legends, thank you very much. If you're not watching live, get your comments in. Lots for you to discuss in there. One of the most full morning shows we've had in ages. You can tell we're starting to get towards the summer as well. Morning shows get really busy when it's close to the summer. Take care, everyone. I'll speak to you in a bit.